June 4, 1940, for the English Channel. 6 hours. The world is gray. It is a gray of such profound, suffocating density that the horizon has ceased to exist, erasing the line where the turbulent, heaving waters of the Atlantic meet the leaden sky. Rain lashes against the concrete casemates of the French coastline, driven by a gale that howls like a wounded animal, a sound that penetrates even the thickest reinforced bunkers of the Atlantic Wall. Inside a staff car winding its way through the rain-slicked roads of Normandy, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, stares out at the storm. His eyes, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who has been fighting a losing war for 2 years, do not see the rain. He sees the mathematical inevitability of disaster. He watches the whitecaps crashing against the beach obstacles he personally designed, logs tipped with teller mines, steel hedgehogs meant to gut landing craft, and he knows they are not enough. The wind shakes the vehicle, a violent gust that would keep any sane aviator grounded and any fleet in harbor. To the men around him, the storm is a blessing, a reprieve granted by nature itself, guaranteeing that the invasion cannot come tonight, nor tomorrow. But to Rommel, the storm is a mask. He turns from the window, the drumming of the rain filling the silence, and the weight of his own prophecy settles in the cabin. He had told his aide, Captain Helmuth Lang, only weeks before, pointing his baton at the empty sands. The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water. Struggle for the beach. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day. Now, as the rain falls, the clock is already ticking toward a midnight he cannot see, and the 24 hours he begged for are slipping through the fingers of a Reich that has forgotten how to listen. This moment, this suspended breath before the plunge, matters not just because it precedes the greatest amphibious assault in human history, but because it represents the final collision of two diametrically opposed realities. On one side of the channel, a coil of industrial might is tightening, a spring compressed by the logistical genius of a nation that has turned the business of war into a production line of terrifying abundance. On the other side, a hollow shell of fanaticism and fading martial glory waits, convinced by its own propaganda that the fortress Europe is impregnable. The tragedy of the German soldier in 1944 is not merely that he is outnumbered. It is that he is living in a carefully constructed fiction. He has been told that the Atlantic Wall is a continuous barrier of concrete and steel, impenetrable and deadly. He has been told that the decadent democracies are too soft to storm the fires of the Aryan will. He expects a disorganized raid, a repetition of the disastrous Dieppe landing of 1942, something that can be crushed on the shingle and used for newsreels. In Berlin, what awaits him is not a raid. It is an annihilation of his understanding of the world. The transition from the arrogance of the occupier to the desperation of the survivor will not happen over months of campaigning, but in the span of a single morning. It is a transformation that will be delivered not just by high explosives, but by the sheer, overwhelming realization that the enemy possesses a power that Berlin cannot even comprehend, let alone counter. To understand the magnitude of Rommel's despair on that rainy morning, one must peel back the layers of the German strategic nightmare. Since late 1943, when Hitler tasked him with inspecting the Western defenses, Rommel had been a man possessed by urgency. He had arrived in France expecting a fortress and found a sieve. The Atlantic Wall, touted by Joseph Goebbels as the ultimate shield of the Reich, was in many places little more than a propaganda wall. There were massive guns, yes, encased in feet of concrete at Calais and Cherbourg, but between these strongpoints lay miles of open coastline protected by nothing more than barbed wire and terrified Ostrepen, conscripted soldiers from the Soviet East who had no desire to die for National Socialism. Rommel had thrown himself into the work with the frenetic energy that had defined his campaigns in North Africa. He was a man of the offensive, forced into a defensive posture, and he applied his aggressive instincts to the static earth. He ordered millions of mines laid. He demanded the installation of Rommel's asparagus, wooden poles planted in fields to shear the wings off gliders. He flooded the marshlands behind the beaches. He worked the men until they dropped, driving his staff cars at breakneck speeds along the coast, barking orders, moving divisions, trying to turn the sand into a killing zone. But beneath the concrete and the minefields lay a fatal fracture in the German command structure, a philosophical schism that would doom the defense before the first boot hit the sand. The debate was simple, brutal, and unsolvable. Rommel, scarred by his experiences in North Africa, knew something that his superior, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, did not. Rommel had felt the lash of Allied air superiority. He had seen the Royal Air Force and the U.S. Army Air Forces turn the sky into a ceiling of fire, interdicting supply lines, smashing columns, and rendering movement in daylight impossible. Rommel argued that the invasion force had to be stopped at the water's edge. The enemy must be annihilated before he reaches our main battlefield, he argued. We must stop him in the water, destroying all his equipment while it is still afloat. To do this, Rommel demanded that the Panzer divisions, the iron fist of the Wehrmacht, be stationed right up against the coast, ready to counterattack immediately. He wanted the tanks within the range of the naval guns, ready to push the Allies back into the sea in those critical first 24 hours. If the Allies established a beachhead, Rommel knew the war was over. The Allied logistical machine would pump men and material onto the continent faster than Germany could move reserves to meet them. Von Rundstedt, the aristocratic last Prussian, disagreed. He viewed the Atlantic Wall as a mere tripwire. He believed the Navy guns would destroy any tanks on the coast. His strategy was to let the Allies land, let them advance inland out of the cover of their naval artillery, and then crush them with a massive, centralized armored reserve held deep in the French interior, near Paris. It was classic Clausewitzian warfare. Trade space for a tactical advantage, lure the enemy in, and destroy him in a war of movement. It was a strategy that made perfect sense on a map table in a bunker in 1918. But in 1944, it was suicide. Von Rundstedt did not understand that once the Allied air forces controlled the sky, a centralized reserve could not move. The panzers would be spotted, strafed, and bombed before they could even reach the battlefield. The argument raged for months. Finally, the decision was kicked up to Hitler. In a decision characteristic of his deteriorating grasp on reality, the Führer chose a compromise that ensured the worst of both worlds. He gave Rommel command of 3 panzer divisions, left 3 in the interior under Rundstedt, and kept 4 crucial divisions, the OKW Reserve, under his personal command. These 4 divisions, the finest in the West, could not be moved without Hitler's direct approval. On the eve of the invasion, the hammer that was supposed to smash the invasion was disassembled, scattered, and locked behind a door that only a sleeping dictator could open. As the rain hammers the roof of Rommel's car, he knows this. He feels the vulnerability of the coast like a physical wound. But even the desert fox is susceptible to the lull of the storm. The German meteorologists, lacking the deep ocean weather stations that the Allies possess in the Atlantic, predict that the gale will last for days. They assure the High Command that no invasion is possible until at least the second half of June. The tension that has held the German army in a vice grip for weeks relaxes. Leave passes are signed. Officers head to Paris for wine and cabaret. And Rommel, looking at the gray chaos of the Channel, makes a fatal calculation. He decides to drive home to Herrlingen. It is his wife Lucy's birthday on June 6. He has bought her a pair of gray suede shoes in Paris. He plans to spend a day with her and then proceed to a meeting with Hitler to beg for more panzers. He believes he has time. He believes the weather is his ally. As his car turns away from the coast, driving east toward Germany, the irony is biblical. The man who predicted that the first 24 hours would be decisive is leaving the battlefield exactly 24 hours before the prophecy comes due. While Rommel drives away from the catastrophe, a German sentry stands in a concrete Tobruk pit overlooking a stretch of sand designated by the Americans as Omaha Beach. His name is insignificant to history, but his experience is the totality of the war. He is 19 years old, perhaps 20. He wears a wool tunic that smells of damp earth and unwashed bodies. He is hungry, not the starvation of the Russian front, but the gnawing, constant dissatisfaction of a ration diet that has become mostly filler, black bread, that is more sawdust than rye, coffee made from roasted acorns, tobacco that burns hot and tastes like burning leaves. In his pocket, wrapped in careful wax paper, is a single, stale crust he is saving for dawn. He looks out at the pitch-black sea, listening to the wind hiss through the barbed wire. He has been told that the Americans are weak, a mongrel race of gangsters and cowboys who will break at the sight of true soldiers. He imagines the invasion, if it comes, as he has seen it in training, a few boats, easily sunk, desperate men wading into machine gun fire. He feels secure in his bunker. He believes in the Atlantic Wall because he has to. But there is a symbol of the coming reality that he cannot yet see, an object that sits in the webbing of an American Ranger hundreds of miles away, waiting to board a landing craft. It is not a weapon. It is a chocolate bar, a Hershey's tropical bar, designed to not melt in the heat, dense with calories. To the American, it is a mundane piece of kit, often complained about for its taste. But to the German soldier, should he ever see it, this bar represents the end of his world. It represents a nation that can ship sugar and cocoa across an ocean infested with U-boats. A nation that can wrap millions of these bars in foil and paper. A nation that has so mastered the logistics of war that it can concern itself with the snack rations of its infantry while Germany struggles to find rubber for its trucks. The chocolate bar is the abundance of democracy made manifest. It is the contrast between a system that feeds its machine with blood and horses and a system that feeds its machine with oil and industry. The German soldier smokes his ersatz tobacco and shivers. He does not know that a fleet of 5,000 ships is pushing through the storm toward him. He does not know that the ocean is about to boil. The deception that has blinded Rommel and the entire German high command is not merely a matter of weather. It is a masterpiece of theater known as Operation Fortitude. For months, the Allies have been building a phantom army in Kent, directly across from the Pas de Calais. Inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, fake radio traffic, and the very real presence of General George S. Patton have convinced the Germans that the attack will come at the narrowest point of the channel, at Calais. The 15th Army, the strongest German formation in France, sits idle there, waiting for Patton, while Normandy is guarded by the 7th Army, a mix of static coastal divisions and a few elite units. This belief is so entrenched that even when the invasion begins, the German generals will view Normandy as a feint, a diversion to draw their reserves away from the real target at Calais. This mental trap is the second lock on the panzer divisions. The first is Hitler's authority. The second is the conviction that the real war is happening elsewhere. The clock strikes midnight. The date turns to June 6, 1944. The storm begins to abate, just as the Allied meteorologist Captain James Stagg predicted, a narrow window of acceptable conditions that the Germans missed. In the darkness above the clouds, the drone of engines begins. It is a sound unlike anything heard before, not a squadron, not a wing, but an armada of the air. Over 18,000 paratroopers, the American 101st and 82nd, the British 6th Airborne, are descending into the hedgerow country behind the beaches. The confusion begins instantly. In the headquarters of the German 7th Army, phones ring with panicked reports. Paratroopers at Saint-Mère-Église. Gliders near the Orne River. Dummies exploding on impact. The reports are contradictory. The Allies have dropped Rupert dolls, rubber dummies rigged with firecrackers, to simulate massive drops away from the actual landing zones. Commanders hesitate. Is this the invasion? Or is it a raid? Is it the diversion for Calais? The precious minutes of the decisive 24 hours begin to bleed away. At La Roche-Guyon, Rommel's headquarters, his chief of staff, General Hans Speidel, is hosting a dinner. The atmosphere is relaxed. When the reports come in, They are dismissed as local skirmishes. Rommel is asleep in Herlingen, hundreds of miles away. The decision loop is broken. At 3, the German naval radar, which has been largely blinded by Allied jamming, picks up blips. Not tens, not hundreds, but thousands. The operators stare at their screens in disbelief. It looks as if the solid land of England has detached itself and is drifting toward France. The horizon, previously invisible in the night, begins to solidify into a wall of steel. Dawn breaks, gray, cold, and wet. The German soldier in the Tobruk pit at Omaha Beach wipes the mist from his eyes. He looks out to sea, expecting the empty gray waves. Instead, he sees the apocalypse. It is a sight that defies the capacity of the human mind to process. The sea is gone. In its place is a city of ships. Battleships with guns the size of tree trunks, cruisers, destroyers, thousands of landing craft churning the water white, transport ships with barrage balloons floating above them, like a festive nightmare. The sheer scale of it shatters the propaganda of the last 4 years instantly. This is not a raid. This is not a decaying democracy. This is a leviathan. The soldier watches as the battleships turn broadside. He sees the flash of the guns. Seconds later, the sound arrives, a tearing of the air, a physical impact that compresses the lungs. The Atlantic Wall, the pride of the Reich, erupts. Concrete bunkers the size of houses are lifted into the air and smashed into dust. The earth shakes with a violence that makes the very ground feel like liquid. The bombardment is the first revelation. The second is the landing. The ramps of the Higgins boats drop, and men pour out. But they are not the disorganized mob the German soldier was promised. They are wave after wave of determined men, backed by Sherman tanks that, impossibly, are floating in the water, the DD tanks, driven by engines of industry that Germany cannot match. The massacre at Omaha is brutal. The Americans are pinned down, slaughtering in the surf. For a few hours, it seems Rommel's prophecy might hold, that the invasion might be stopped at the water line. The German machine gunners fire until their barrels melt. They radio for support. They ask for the panzers. And this is where the tragedy of the German position culminates. The 21st Panzer Division is near Caen, within striking distance. Its commander, General Feuchtinger, sees the gliders, sees the threat. He is ready to move. But he has no orders. He calls his superiors. They tell him to wait. He waits while the British consolidate Sword Beach. He waits while the Canadians take Juno. He waits while the Americans bleed and die but keep crawling forward at Omaha. Further back, the Great Panzer Lys, the 12th SS Hitlerjugend, and the Panzer Lehr are sitting engines cold. Their commanders are frantic. They know that every minute the Allies are allowed to unload tanks and artillery is a nail in the coffin of the Wehrmacht. They call OKW, High Command, in Berchtesgaden. The panzers must be released. The invasion is here. The voice on the other end of the line is terrified, but not of the Allies. We cannot release the reserves. They are under the Führer's direct command. Then wake him. Wake the Führer. The Führer has taken a sleeping draught. He is not to be disturbed before noon. No one dares wake him. It is a detail so absurd it feels like fiction. The fate of Europe, the lives of millions, the outcome of the greatest military operation in history, hangs on the sleep schedule of one drug-addled dictator in the Bavarian Alps. While Hitler sleeps, the decisive 24 hours burn away. The Allied beachhead, fragile as an eggshell at 6:30, begins to harden into iron by 10. The Americans scale the cliffs of Pont du Hoc. The British push inland. The sheer volume of material coming ashore is staggering: trucks, jeeps, medical supplies, ammunition crates, telephone wire, typewriters, blood plasma. The industrial artery is connected. By the time Rommel receives the call at his home in Herlingen, it is late morning. The shock on his face is absolute. He packs his uniform frantically, knowing that he is already too late. The drive back to France is a nightmare of frustration. He knows, with the clarity of a tactician, that the game is lost. The panzers, when they are finally released later that afternoon, will be forced to move in daylight. They will be spotted by the typhoons and thunderbolts. They will be decimated on the roads, turned into burning scrap before they even see an Allied tank. On the ground, the German soldier at Omaha has run out of ammunition. He is deafened by the shelling, covered in concrete dust, shaking from the adrenaline crash. He watches as the Americans crest the dune line. He sees them moving not with the desperation of men fighting for survival, but with the coordinated purpose of a machine. He sees their equipment, the semi-automatic Garand rifles that fire without bolting, the unending grenades, the radios that work. He raises his hands. As he is marched past the beach, he sees the debris of the landing. He sees the bodies, yes, but he also sees the flotsam of the American supply chain. He sees a crate that has burst open. Spilled onto the bloody sand are cartons of cigarettes. Lucky Strikes. Not the loose, crumbling tobacco he smokes, but perfectly rolled, white cylinders in bright red and white packs. Hundreds of them. Thousands. He sees a soldier tear open a ration pack and eat meat from a tin, then casually discard a half-eaten bar of chocolate. The German soldier stares at the chocolate in the sand. It is melting slightly in the heat of the fires. In that brown puddle of sugar and cocoa, he sees the truth that Goebbels tried to hide. He realizes that he hasn't just been fighting an army. He has been fighting an economy. He has been fighting the future. The ideology of the Übermensch, the will to power, the spiritual superiority of the Aryan, all of it crumbles before the reality of a nation that can afford to throw chocolate onto a beach while storming a continent. The sun sets on June 6, 1944. The longest day is over. The Allies hold the beaches. The Atlantic Wall is breached. Rommel arrives back at his headquarters that night, his face a mask of ash. He looks at the map. The lines have been drawn. The buildup has begun. He listens to the reports of the panzers, delayed, bombed, stalled. He knows that the war will drag on, that millions more will die, that cities will burn. But he also knows that the ending,